And now in this second part, joining the pieces together, and I'm sorry I had a camera blip in the end of the first part, and what I was saying was that, before I knocked my camera, was that I like to have a decent sized knot on the front of the piece, because when I want to cut the basting thread and remove the papers at the end of the project, it's really easy to find that knot and snip it off. And so I have two basted pieces ready to join, a dark piece and a light piece, and it's always much easier to start sewing with the lighter of two pieces facing you. And I'm holding the pieces here back to back, and you can see, I think, an illustration of why. If you baste your pieces in the same direction each time, you have one corner flap one side, one corner the other side, and your piece is in symmetry. Whereas if you baste one piece clockwise, one piece anti-clockwise, you end up with two layers in one corner and a thin corner. So choose whichever way you prefer to go and stick to that, whatever the shape of your piece, be it square, triangular, octagon, hexagon, whatever shape you're working on, the principle is always the same. And for joining the pieces together, same thing, any needle will do, the needle you like. I have moved on recently to a much shorter needle, because the shorter the needle, the easier it is to get it through the fabric. The important thing is that the needle is sharp, that way I don't have to fiddle with a thimble. And even if the eye is a little bit big, I still can do more or less invisible stitches with a needle with a big eye. And I like a big eye because it means I don't have to waste time with the threader each time I want to thread up my needle. And this is my favourite thread. It's DMC. I buy 500 meters reel at a time, and the colour I like is got a reference number. It's 4847, and it's a grey colour, and it kind of melts into nearly every fabric, and is pretty much more or less invisible when you join the pieces. You can see stitches, I'm sure, but this is a handmade quilt I'm working on, and so I don't mind that you can see the stitches a little bit. These aren't cat's teeth, as we called them when we learned to sew at school. They're not huge stitches, but they're kind of visible, but they're neat, even, and they disappear into the fabric more or less. And that's, I think, because of this grey colour. So I've got my thread, my DMC. I've got the needle threaded from the loose end of the reel, and I'm going to do that thing of marrying the thread with the needle. So I take the needle, pass the thread between my finger and thumb, get the sharp end of the needle just to catch the thread if I can. There it is, caught once. Bend the end of the thread over, catch it a second time by pushing the needle through, so that my thread's caught twice, and then I'm just going to pull those two caught loops of thread down the needle, and that way my thread won't come off when I'm sewing. That really is an invaluable trick. And then I'm going to pull off a length of thread, not too long, because you don't want your arm going way over your shoulder when you're stitching. It's much quicker to have a shorter piece of thread and change your needle often than it is to have a great long piece of thread and then make these exaggerated arm movements, particularly if you're sewing in a public place like on a bus or in the metro. And so you don't want to knot your thread to start sewing, joining the pieces together. You need to take your two pieces, align up the edges nicely, particularly the corners, because you can shift the fabric about as you sew. Align your pieces nicely. I'm not sure how I can get to a good angle here so it can be seen. Fold the corner of the piece behind out your way. Start with the lighter of the two colours facing you, and have the front piece one cotton thread width lower than the back piece. And take your needle and thread, and here you go in at the very corner of your piece against your finger and thumb. Twist the needle if you need to a little bit, go into the corner. And now I'm through. Pull the needle through, come more or less to the end, leave about a centimetre of thread sticking out the back. And with that last centimetre of thread, tuck it in at an angle of about 45 degrees under your thumb. Then go through the same hole with your needle and thread, bring it through. Okay, and you want to bring your needle through the loop you have made. Once, bring that loop down to about a centimetre and then bring the needle through again. So your thread's gone through that original loop twice, and then tug that tight. So you've got a loose tail and a knotted thread, and then for the next stitch you want to pass the needle underneath that little tail. Put the needle against your fabric, 2 threads down from the edge, and push it through to the back, bring it out, and that way you have caught the tail in your thread. And you want to do that twice at least. Second time, under that little tail, into your fabric, through, straighter, parallel, adjacent, cutting across, not at an angle. This is whip stitch, so you're cutting across. And that's it. And now you're secure, ready to stitch. And you can see those first, I don't know how well this is showing up, the first 2 little stitches have made like a little groove there, and that gives you a line that you're going to follow all the way along with your 2 pieces. Every now and then straighten them up, align them, keep that corner out the way, and just whip stitch along. And the thing to do is to not hold the pieces too tight. People have different techniques. They use magnets to hold their pieces together. I've seen people use paper clips, and people use clothes pegs, all sorts of devices to hold the pieces. But just I find gripping them in my fingers is the quickest and the easiest way to do it. And keep your finger behind, and you're making 2 movements. One is you're kind of pressing the fabric pieces and the paper pieces towards you, and the other you're kind of pushing the needle through the 2 pieces of your quilt as you sew. So that's 2 movements, and you're just stitching along as you go. Little stitches, I don't know, about 1 millimetre apart. Keep the thread out the way of those little tails there, and you don't unnecessarily tie your fingers by pressing too hard, and you'll find that you can stitch, really quickly and really near the edge, not so near the edge. 1 thread from the edge is too near because those stitches will be visible. Too far in, the stitches will be visible. It literally needs to be about a thread or 2 from the edge. I don't know if I'm in the camera here as I'm going along, and that's it really. You stitching along until you get to the end of the piece where you're going to tie off your piece. There you are, stitching on camera. There's always room for lots of catches and knots and errors. So I'm going to do a few big stitches so I can get to the end quickly and show you how I tie that off. Keep going, whip stitch straight across. When you get near the end, you've got your second caught in there. You've got your second tail or a flap that needs moving out the way, this one. You want to stitch your last stitch right into the 2 corners of the piece, keeping them really nice and square, really on top of each other, symmetrical, nice tight corner. And for the last stitch, like the first stitch, go through the same hole twice, and go through again, and this time you want to catch your loop. You don't want your pieces coming apart in your quilt, so go through your loop once, through your loop twice, pull that tight, then turn your piece over. Now I'm on the dark side. Take your needle and thread and just put your needle in run it along the inside of the seam for about 1 centimetre, bring it out, and you are ready to cut off. And you can open up your piece, and there you are, you've got 2 nicely joined bits. Pretty much invisible stitching, I think, there on those two pieces. And so I hope that helps you with the techniques for basting and for stitching the pieces together if you decide to try some English paper piecing. Thanks for watching.